The snow fell in thick, unrelenting sheets, transforming the rural highway into a treacherous white void. Jack Foster squinted through his frosted windshield, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, as his old pickup truck crawled forward. The heater had given up hours ago, leaving his breath to fog in the freezing cabin. Exhaustion pulled at his eyes after a 14-hour shift at the garage, but thoughts of his 10-year-old daughter waiting at home kept him alert. The radio crackled with warnings about the worst blizzard to hit the region in decades. That's when he saw it. A dark shape, half buried in the snow by the roadside. He slowed, peering through the blizzard. A person. Motionless. Without hesitation, Jack pulled over and stepped into the howling storm, the bitter cold immediately stealing his breath away. But he didn't know that this single act of kindness would completely transform his quiet, struggling life forever. Jack Foster was a man defined by resilience and sacrifice. At 38, his face already carried the weathered lines of someone a decade older. His calloused hands told the story of countless hours spent underneath vehicles at Miller's auto shop, where he'd worked since dropping out of community college 17 years ago. 3 years earlier, cancer had taken his wife Sarah, leaving him to raise their daughter Ella alone in their modest two-bedroom house on the outskirts of Millfield, a forgotten town that the 21st century seemed to have largely bypassed. The framed photos on their living room wall captured happier times. Sarah's radiant smile, Ella playing piano at her first recital, the three of them camping by Lake Millfield. But these memories stood in stark contrast to their present reality. Jack worked 60-hour weeks between his main job and whatever side work he could find, yet still struggled to keep up with the remaining medical bills and mortgage payments. Sarah's illness had drained their savings, then their retirement accounts, and finally forced them to take out a second mortgage. The financial burden that remained was crushing, a constant weight on Jack's shoulders that he carried in silence. The piano that once filled their home with Sarah's music sat silent in the corner, a dust-covered monument to what they had lost. Sarah had been teaching Ella to play before she got sick. The lessons had stopped during those final difficult months, and neither Jack nor Ella had touched the instrument since the funeral. Jack couldn't bring himself to sell it, though he'd considered it during particularly tight months. It was one of the few tangible connections to Sarah that remained. A reminder of evenings spent listening to her play, while he and Ella danced around the living room. "Dad, when can I start lessons again?" Ella had asked just last week, her small fingers tracing the silent keys. "Soon, sweetheart," Jack had promised, knowing it was likely a lie. Music lessons were a luxury they simply couldn't afford, not when the electric bill was overdue, and Ella's winter boots needed replacing. Despite their hardships, Jack maintained a quiet dignity. He never complained, never missed a day of work, never failed to attend Ella's school events. His neighbors respected him, though few understood the depth of his struggles. To most, he was simply the widowed mechanic. Polite, reliable, unremarkable, what they didn't see were the nights he spent at the kitchen table, stretching dollars that refused to stretch far enough, or the way he gave Ella the larger portion at dinner while claiming he wasn't hungry. That morning before his shift, Jack had received another letter from the bank. The threat of foreclosure loomed larger with each passing month. He had tucked it away in his jacket pocket, unwilling to let this new worry show on his face as he dropped Ella at school. Her teacher, Miss Wilson, had caught him in the hallway, mentioning a music scholarship opportunity that would be perfect for Ella, if only they could afford the application fee and audition preparation. Jack had nodded politely, adding it to the growing list of things he wished he could provide for his daughter. Later, his boss had reluctantly denied his request for additional hours. "Business is slow in winter, Jack, you know that. I'm barely keeping the lights on as it is." So he had worked later than usual that night, fixing the shop owner's personal vehicle for a small cash payment under the table. The old Chevrolet had needed a new timing belt and water pump, a 6-hour job that Jack had somehow completed in 4, knowing that every minute counted when your child was waiting at home. The shop owner had counted out the money, $75, in worn bills, and Jack had pocketed it gratefully. It wasn't much, but it would cover Ella's school field trip next week and maybe a small treat. These were the calculations that consumed his days: how to stretch each dollar, which bill could wait another month, what small joy he could afford to give his daughter. Then came the unexpected snowstorm, the closed roads, and the desperate call to Mrs. Peterson next door to check on Ella. The kind widow had been a godsend since Sarah's passing, never hesitating to watch Ella when Jack's work schedule demanded it. "Don't you worry about a thing," she'd assured him over the crackly phone line. "She's already had dinner and is working on her homework. You just drive careful, you hear? This storm is turning nasty." The roads had deteriorated rapidly as Jack drove home, the snowfall becoming a white curtain that his headlights could barely penetrate. He'd reduced his speed to a crawl, gripping the wheel with tension that radiated up his arms and into his shoulders. The truck had fishtailed twice already on hidden patches of ice. And now, this figure in the snow. Jack trudged through the knee-deep drifts, the bitter wind cutting through his inadequate jacket. The cold burned his lungs with each breath. As he reached the motionless form, his heart pounded. A woman lay face down, her dark hair fanning across the white ground, her body already being reclaimed by the relentless snow. Jack knelt beside her, gently rolling her over. Her skin was pale blue with cold, but when he pressed fingers to her neck, he felt a faint, thready pulse. Her face was striking even in its current state, elegant features, high cheekbones, the kind of face that suggested both intelligence and determination. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Jack checked for obvious injuries but found none. Hypothermia was the immediate threat. He remembered the winter safety training from his brief stint at the volunteer fire department years ago. Every minute counted in these situations. Without hesitation, Jack gathered her into his arms. She was slight, perhaps 5'5", but lifting dead weight through deep snow tested his strength. By the time he reached his truck, his muscles burned with effort. He managed to open the passenger door and place her inside, cranking the defective heater to its highest setting. He removed his own jacket and placed it over her, then turned the truck back toward the road. Jack tried his cell phone. No signal. He looked at the unconscious woman and made a decision. The nearest hospital was in Clayton, 20 miles away. In this weather, with these roads, it might as well have been 200. He put the truck in gear and began driving slowly toward town. Perhaps Dr. Winters, the retired physician who lived near the town center, could help. But after less than a mile, flashing lights appeared ahead. A police cruiser blocked the road, and Officer Brennan, bundled against the elements, approached Jack's window. "Road's completely closed ahead," Brennan shouted over the wind. "Multiple accidents. Highway department can't keep up." "I've got an emergency," Jack called back, gesturing to his passenger. "This woman needs medical attention." Officer Brennan shined his flashlight into the cab, his expression grim when he saw the woman's condition. "Hospital's unreachable, Jack. No ambulance is getting through tonight. You got somewhere closer?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "My place. It's just back a mile. Get her warm, keep her breathing. I'll radio Dr. Winters to come when he can." Back at his small house, Jack carried the woman inside. Mrs. Peterson, who had been watching Ella, gasped when she saw them. "My lord, Jack, what's happened?" "Found her in the snow," Jack explained, laying the woman gently on the couch. "Roads are closed. Can't get her to a hospital." Ella appeared in the hallway, her eyes wide. "Dad?" "Is okay, honey," Jack reassured her, though he was far from certain. "This lady needs our help. She got caught in the storm." Mrs. Peterson helped remove the woman's wet coat and boots, while Jack built up the fire. They found no identification, no purse, nothing to indicate who she might be. Jack sent Ella for blankets while Mrs. Peterson made hot tea for when, if, the woman regained consciousness. "He needs dry clothes," Mrs. Peterson whispered. Jack nodded and reluctantly went to the closet where Sarah's things still hung, untouched since her death. He ran his fingers over the familiar fabrics, each item a memory he wasn't ready to part with. The soft blue sweater Sarah had worn on their last Christmas together, the scarf he'd given her for their 10th anniversary. He selected a warm sweater and sweatpants, then turned away as Mrs. Peterson changed the stranger's clothes. Throughout the night, Jack maintained his vigil. Mrs. Peterson eventually returned home next door, promising to check in at first light. Ella refused to go to bed, instead curling up in the armchair across from the couch, her worried eyes fixed on the stranger's face. "Is she going to die?" Ella asked in a small voice. The question twisted in Jack's chest. "No, sweetheart. She's just very cold. She needs to warm up. Like when I fell through the ice last winter?" Similar, but not as bad, Jack assured her, though he wasn't certain. The important thing is that we found her in time. Ella nodded solemnly, drawing her knees up to her chest. Mom would have helped her too, right? Your mom would have been the first one out in that storm, Jack said softly. She never could turn away from someone who needed help. The memory of Sarah's compassion hung in the air between them. It had been one of her defining qualities, a willingness to help others regardless of the personal cost. Jack had admired it, though sometimes it had frustrated him. You can't save everyone, Sarah, he'd once said, after she'd spent their grocery money on a neighbor's electric bill. Sometimes you have to take care of yourself first. Her reply had stayed with him. If everyone thought that way, Jack, what kind of world would we live in? As midnight passed, Jack checked the woman's pulse and breathing regularly. He gently placed warm compresses on her neck and forehead, a technique he remembered from when Ella had her hypothermia scare. Gradually, color returned to the woman's face. Her breathing became deeper, more regular. Around 3 a.m, Ella finally succumbed to sleep in the armchair. Jack covered her with a blanket, then resumed his watch. Just before dawn, the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, intelligent eyes that registered confusion, then alarm. She tried to sit up, gasping. Easy, Jack said softly. You're safe. I found you on the highway. The woman stared at him, her gaze sharp despite her condition. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in her surroundings with remarkable focus. There was something almost clinical about her assessment, as though she were cataloging potential threats and exits. Where am I? Her voice was hoarse, but steady. My home. The roads were closed. I couldn't get you to a hospital. She seemed to process this information, her body relaxing slightly, though wariness remained in her expression. After a moment she nodded, as if having reached a decision. Thank you, she said simply. I'm Jack Foster. That's my daughter, Ella. He nodded toward the sleeping child. Can you tell me your name? The woman hesitated, almost imperceptibly. Rachel, she finally said. My name is Rachel. Morning brought a temporary lull in the storm. The world outside was transformed, with snow piled in drifts against the houses. The roads remained impassable, according to the radio reports. Jack made a quick call to his boss, explaining the situation. For once, his employer was understanding. Nobody's getting their cars fixed today anyway, he'd said. Take care of your guest. In Jack's small kitchen, Ella sat at the table eating cereal, watching their guest with undisguised curiosity. Rachel stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered neighborhood. She wore Sarah's clothes, which fit her reasonably well, though the sleeves of the sweater were slightly too long. The forecast says the storm continues through tomorrow, Rachel said, turning back to face them. You're welcome to stay until the road's clear, Jack offered, as he poured coffee into a chipped mug. It's not much, but it's warm. I've imposed enough already. Where will you go? Ella asked directly. Rachel seemed startled by the child's forthrightness. I'm not sure yet. Then it's settled, Jack said, ending the discussion. You'll stay. Rachel hesitated, then nodded with a grateful smile. Jack noticed something in that smile. A hint of relief, perhaps, but also caution. This woman was guarded, careful. He wondered what circumstances had brought her to that lonely stretch of highway during a blizzard, but didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their private burdens. He understood that better than most. Throughout the day, Jack observed their guest with quiet curiosity. Rachel moved with purpose and precision. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with unusual deliberation. When Jack returned from shoveling the walkway, he found her washing the breakfast dishes. You don't have to do that, he said. I want to help. It's the least I can do. Jack noticed her hands, not soft office hands, but not workers' hands either, somewhere in between. Everything about her suggested education, refinement, even authority. Yet she adapted to their modest home without complaint. What happened last night? Jack asked, before I found you. Rachel's movements faltered briefly. My car slid off the road during the worst of the storm. I tried to walk for help. In that blizzard, I made a poor decision. Something in her tone discouraged further questions. She turned the conversation deftly. You've lived here long? All my life, Jack admitted. except for a year of community college in Clayton. It seems like a nice town. It's home, Jack shrugged. Not much opportunity these days, but good people mostly. Rachel nodded, absorbing this information. And your daughter? She's lovely. Smart too, I imagine. Jack's expression softened. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Gets that from her mother. I'm sorry for your loss, Rachel said quietly. Jack looked up, surprised. He hadn't mentioned Sarah's death. The pictures, she explained, gesturing toward the living room, and the way you both talk about her. Later, in the living room, Ella showed Rachel her school books. To Jack's surprise, Rachel engaged his daughter with natural ease, helping with homework questions. He watched from the doorway as Ella smiled and laughed, more than she had in months. Ms. Rachel knows everything, Dad, Ella declared. She's helping me with my history project. Is that so? Jack raised an eyebrow. She knows all about the Supreme Court and how laws are made, Ella continued excitedly. And she's teaching me big words like jurisprudence and precedent. Jack caught Rachel's eye over Ella's head. A silent understanding passed between them. Rachel clearly had legal training, though she'd said nothing about her profession. The most remarkable moment came when Ella led Rachel to the old upright piano in the corner, Sarah's piano, largely untouched since her death. Dust had settled on the closed lid, a visible reminder of their loss. Do you play? Ella asked hopefully. Rachel approached the instrument with unexpected reverence, running her fingers lightly over the keys. A little, she admitted. She sat on the bench, testing a few notes. The piano was out of tune, but her fingers moved with practiced confidence. A simple melody emerged, then grew more complex, a Chopin nocturne that Sarah had often played on quiet evenings. Ella watched, transfixed. Can you teach me something? His daughter asked eagerly. Rachel hesitated, then shifted over on the bench, making room. This is easy. Watch my fingers. Jack observed silently from the doorway, a lump forming in his throat. The sight of his daughter at the piano again, her face alight with concentration, struck him deeply. For months, the piano had stood as a painful reminder. Now, somehow, it had become a bridge, connecting them to a stranger, who no longer felt like a stranger at all. That night, as he tucked Ella into bed, she whispered, "She doesn't feel like a stranger, Dad." What do you mean? I don't know, she just doesn't. Ella yawned. It's like she was supposed to find us. Jack smiled and brushed the hair from his daughter's forehead. Get some sleep, kiddo. She'll still be here tomorrow. But as he closed Ella's door, Jack wondered how long Rachel would actually stay. There was something about her, a restlessness perhaps, or a wariness, that suggested she wasn't accustomed to staying in one place for long. The thought troubled him more than he cared to admit. Later, unable to sleep, Jack checked on their guest. Rachel rested on the couch, her breathing even in sleep. Her coat hung nearby, and a small wallet had fallen from the pocket onto the floor. Jack picked it up, turning it in his hands. Ethics warred with curiosity. The wallet might hold answers to questions Rachel seemed reluctant to address. After a moment's hesitation, he placed it on the coffee table, untouched. As he turned to leave, Rachel spoke, her eyes still closed. Most people would have looked. Jack froze. Most people weren't raised by my father. Rachel opened her eyes, studying him in the dim light from the hallway. You're a good man, Jack Foster. I'm just a mechanic who did what anyone would do. We both know that's not true. She sat up slightly. There are plenty of people who would have driven past, or worse, taken advantage of the situation. Jack shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Well, I'm not one of them. No, Rachel agreed softly. You're not. The storm finally broke on the third day. Jack was outside clearing snow from the driveway when a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. It stopped near his house. Two men in dark suits exited the vehicle, scanning the neighborhood with practiced efficiency. Their posture and alertness marked them as law enforcement, or something similar. Jack continued shoveling but watched them from the corner of his eye. The men approached a neighbor across the street, showed something that might have been identification, and spoke briefly before moving on to the next house. Their methodical approach suggested they were searching for someone. Jack slipped inside, finding Rachel helping Ella with a puzzle at the kitchen table. The domestic scene might have seemed perfectly natural if not for the tension in Rachel's shoulders, the way her eyes constantly flickered toward the window. "There are men outside," Jack said quietly. "Looking for someone." Rachel's face paled. She moved to the window, peered out, then stepped back quickly. "I should leave." "Who are they?" Rachel glanced at Ella, then back to Jack. "Could we talk privately?" In Jack's bedroom, Rachel paced, conflict evident on her face. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you. I figured that much. My name is Rachel Winters. I'm a federal judge." Jack stared, processing this revelation. "A judge?" "3 days ago, I refused to sign an order that would have protected Maxwell Industries from federal prosecution, a corporation with powerful connections. And someone ran me off the road that night. It wasn't an accident." Jack sank onto the edge of the bed. "You're saying someone tried to kill you?" "I'm saying I was warned to change my ruling. I didn't. Then my car was forced into a ditch during a blizzard. I was trying to reach a safe location when the cold overcame me." Rachel's voice remained steady, but fear flickered in her eyes. Maxwell Industries has billions of dollars at stake in this case. Their executives face criminal charges for environmental violations that sickened hundreds of people. These men outside could be federal marshals looking for me, or they could be working for the people who want me silenced. Jack ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "I have a daughter to think about." "I know. That's why I need to leave. Now, and go where, if these people are as powerful as you say? I have colleagues I can trust, but I need to reach them." Jack struggled with the decision, fear for Ella warring with his instinct to help. "If I get involved in this, whatever this is, I could lose everything, my job, my home." He didn't say "my daughter," but the fear hung between them. "I understand," Rachel said softly. "You've done more than enough already. I'll gather my things." As she turned to leave, Jack spoke again. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. I watched her fight even when the odds were impossible." Rachel waited, sensing more. She always said, "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right anyway." Jack stood. "We'll help you reach your colleagues." The plan was simple but risky. Jack would drive Rachel to a neighboring town where one of her trusted colleagues could meet them. They would leave after dark when the men in suits had gone. Jack knew the back roads well enough to avoid main checkpoints if necessary. As dusk fell, Jack prepared the truck, while Rachel said goodbye to Ella. "Will you come back?" Ella asked, her voice small. Rachel knelt to the child's level. "I hope so, sweetheart." "You have to. You haven't finished teaching me that song." Rachel smiled, though her eyes glistened. "That's true. I haven't." Jack left Ella with Mrs. Peterson, telling both only that he was driving Rachel to meet a friend. The less they knew, the better. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched as they pulled away from the house, though the street appeared deserted. As they drove through the night, Jack kept checking the rearview mirror for headlights. Rachel sat tensely beside him, her hands clasped in her lap. "Why did you become a judge?" Jack asked, partly to break the silence, partly out of genuine curiosity. Rachel considered the question. "My father was a factory worker. He lost his pension when the company declared bankruptcy after years of financial misconduct. The executives walked away wealthy. Workers like my father got nothing. So you became a judge to fight injustice?" "I became a judge to uphold the law. Sometimes that means protecting the powerful. Sometimes it means holding them accountable." She looked out the window at the passing darkness. "This time, it nearly got me killed." Jack drove in silence for a moment. "Must be nice, though, having the power to make those decisions." Rachel glanced at him. "Power isn't the point. The law is supposed to apply equally to everyone, the wealthy CEO and the factory worker. My father never got justice, but maybe others will because of this case." "What exactly did Maxwell Industries do?" Jack asked. Rachel hesitated, then spoke carefully. "They knowingly dumped toxic chemicals into the water supply of several communities. When people started getting sick, cancer clusters, children with rare diseases, they falsified environmental reports and bribed officials to look the other way." Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "And they'll get away with it?" Not if I can help it, Rachel said, determination hardening her voice. The evidence is overwhelming, but money and power can create their own reality sometimes. They reached the designated meeting point, a 24-hour diner off the highway. A silver sedan was already waiting in the parking lot. That's my colleague, Rachel said, Federal Marshal Davis. Before exiting the truck, she turned to Jack. Thank you for everything. Just doing what anyone would do, Jack said, echoing his earlier words. Rachel smiled. We both know that's not true. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a business card, pressing it into his hand. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. It's my direct line. Jack watched as Rachel walked to the waiting car and spoke briefly with the driver. She looked back once, raising her hand in farewell, then disappeared into the sedan, which promptly drove away. The following weeks returned to normal, or what passed for normal in Jack's life. He worked at the garage, helped Ella with homework, paid what bills he could. Yet something had changed. Ella played the piano again, practicing the simple tune Rachel had taught her. Jack found himself thinking of their visitor often, wondering if she was safe, if her case had proceeded. He watched the news more carefully, looking for any mention of Maxwell Industries. There was nothing until, 3 weeks after Rachel's departure, the story broke. Federal agents had raided the corporation's headquarters. Executives were led away in handcuffs. Environmental violations, fraud, conspiracy. The charges kept mounting. Jack followed the coverage with growing interest. When Rachel appeared briefly on the courthouse steps, he found himself pausing the television, studying her face. She looked different in her judge's robes, powerful, authoritative. Yet he could still see the woman who had sat at Sarah's piano, teaching Ella simple melodies. 1 month later, an official envelope arrived, addressed to Jack. Inside, an invitation to a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C. Transportation included. Are we going, Dad? Ella asked, eyes wide with excitement. Jack stared at the invitation, uncertain. I don't know, kiddo. But they did go. Jack used his one suit, purchased for Sarah's funeral and rarely worn since. Ella wore her best dress. They checked into a modest hotel in Washington, overwhelmed by the city's scale and bustle. For a girl who had never traveled more than 50 miles from Millfield, the capital was a different world entirely. The next morning, Jack and Ella sat in the gallery of a congressional hearing room. The space buzzed with reporters and officials. At the front, Rachel sat before a committee, composed and authoritative in her judge's robes. She looked different here. Powerful, commanding, yet unmistakably the same woman who had taught Ella piano in their living room. Judge Winters, the committee chairman began, you've presented evidence of corruption reaching the highest levels of Maxwell Industries. Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to add to your statement? Yes, Rachel said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I'd like to acknowledge that I would not be alive to testify today if not for the actions of a private citizen, a man who risked his safety to rescue a stranger in a blizzard. The room quieted. Rachel's gaze found Jack in the gallery. I owe my life to Jack Foster, a single father and auto mechanic from Millfield. He exemplifies the best of America, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not for recognition or reward, but because it's right. Heads turned toward Jack. Ella squeezed his hand, beaming with pride. When I was stranded, injured, and suffering from hypothermia, Mr. Foster brought me into his home. He cared for me, protected me, and later helped me reach safety when my life was in danger. He did this despite his own struggles, despite the risk to himself and his family. The chairman looked toward Jack. Would you stand, Mr. Foster? The committee would like to recognize your actions. Reluctantly, Jack rose. Cameras flashed. Ella stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. Mr. Foster, the chairman continued, this country was built by ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things. On behalf of Congress, thank you for your courage and compassion. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. Local and national media descended on their small town. Jack was interviewed, reluctantly becoming a temporary celebrity. The auto shop was suddenly busy with customers wanting their cars fixed by that hero mechanic. People smiled and nodded when he walked down the street. Children asked Ella what it was like to have a hero for a father. The school principal called Jack to her office. The Westridge Foundation contacted us. They're offering Ella a full scholarship to their arts program, including the summer music camp. Jack struggled to comprehend the turn of events. They said Judge Winter spoke highly of Ella's potential. At the state capitol, the governor shook Jack's hand for the cameras. Our state highway department could use a man with your mechanical expertise and character, Mr. Foster. The position includes full benefits, retirement plan, and a significant increase in salary from what you're making now. Jack looked dazed. I'm just a small-town mechanic. You're the man who saved Judge Winters and helped bring down one of the biggest corruption cases in a decade. You're exactly who we need. At home, Jack sorted through mail, cards, and letters from strangers across the country. No checks, no cash rewards, but something perhaps more valuable. Recognition of his character, of his worth beyond his humble circumstances. Even the bank called. The threat of foreclosure vanished as they suddenly discovered a processing error in his account. Jack suspected Rachel's influence, though she denied any involvement when he called to thank her. That's not how the justice system works, Jack, she'd said, though he'd detected amusement in her voice. But I'm glad things are working out. Ella opened an envelope, pulled out a letter. Dad? It's from Rachel. Jack took the letter, read silently. His expression shifted from surprise to gentle warmth. What does it say? Ella asked eagerly. She's coming to visit, next month. The letter contained more than just news of her visit. Rachel wrote about the Maxwell case, how the company had been forced to establish a fund for the victims of their environmental negligence. Families who had suffered for years would finally receive compensation and medical care. She wrote about her faith in the system being restored, about finding renewed purpose in her work. And she wrote about missing them, both of them. When Rachel visited, she brought Ella sheet music and spent hours at the piano with her. She and Jack talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives. There was an ease between them that surprised Jack, a connection he hadn't felt since Sarah. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was something, a possibility perhaps. Will you come back again? He asked as he walked her to her car. Try to stop me, she replied with a smile. The visits became regular, once a month at first, then more frequently. Rachel found reasons to be in the area, court cases, speaking engagements, professional conferences. Each time, she stayed a little longer. Jack took the job with the highway department. The regular hours and better pay transformed their lives. He no longer came home with grease embedded in his skin, though he still kept his tools in the garage and fixed neighbors' cars on weekends. Old habits died hard. Ella thrived at the Arts Academy. Her piano playing improved dramatically. She has real talent, Rachel observed. Like her mother, I imagine. Sarah would be so proud, Jack agreed. The mention of his late wife no longer brought the sharp pain it once had, just a gentle ache, a fond remembrance. 1 year later. A concert hall at the Westridge Arts Academy. Ella sat at a grand piano on stage, playing with confidence and emotion. Her fingers moved over the keys with growing assurance, coaxing forth a piece far more complex than the simple tune Rachel had first taught her. In the audience, Jack watched, pride evident on his face. Beside him sat Rachel, elegant in a simple dress rather than her judicial robes. Their shoulders nearly touched. When Ella hit a particularly moving passage, Rachel's hand found Jack's briefly, squeezing once before letting go. After the performance, backstage, Ella ran to them both, wrapped in a group hug that felt natural, as if they'd done it 100 times. Did you like it? Ella asked breathlessly. I was nervous about the middle section. It was perfect, Rachel assured her. Your mother would have been so proud. The comment might once have been presumptuous, but now Jack nodded in agreement. She absolutely would. Later, they walked the academy grounds. Ella ran ahead to greet friends, leaving Jack and Rachel walking side by side. The promotion suits you, Rachel observed. Highway infrastructure director has a nice ring to it. Most days I still feel like I'm just a mechanic in a nicer shirt. You were never just anything, Jack. They stopped at a bench overlooking a garden, where early spring flowers had begun to bloom. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. You know, Jack said thoughtfully, when I saw you in that snow, I never imagined I'd upend your life, Rachel suggested with a smile, that you'd help us heal. Rachel looked at him, surprised. Ella playing again, the house feeling like a home, not a memorial. That's worth more than any job or recognition. You did the same for me, Rachel admitted. I was becoming cynical, losing faith in people, in the system I'd dedicated my life to upholding. They watched Ella laughing with her friends in the distance. It's strange, Jack mused. When you help someone, you never really know how your own world might change in the process. Rachel nodded, her hand finding his on the bench between them. Sometimes, the kindest act in a storm can rewrite someone's entire future. And in that moment, as they sat watching Ella, this child who had known so much loss yet now played with such joy, Jack understood that the future being rewritten wasn't just his daughter's. It was his own. It was Rachel's. Perhaps it was the future of anyone who chose courage over fear, kindness over indifference. The storm had passed, but its impact remained, not in destruction, but in the unexpected connections it had forged and the healing that followed. Life would never be the same for any of them, and somehow that was exactly as it should be.